Welcome back to Let's Talk Adoption. And today we are talking about something every adoptive parent should pause and consider, but often families don't know how to evaluate this. What actually makes an adoption agency ethical? I'm Kim and I'm here with Heather.
Yeah, happy to be here, Kim. I think that e- e- even more, or maybe not more, but equal to understanding what makes an adoption agency ethical is really understanding how to evaluate an agency's values and if they align with yours.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you are trusting an adoption agency with one of the most life-altering journeys you'll ever make. And
Mm-hmm.
it's good to know who you're working with and that they are because they are also going to be representing you.
And I love that this is a conversation that we're having in modern adoption
Mhm,
values, alignment, because back in the day, Heather, adoptive parents didn't really think about these things. They didn't really
mhm,
think about, is this an ethical agency and do my values align? They just thought, we want a baby, call an
mhm.
agency, and then our outcome will be we'll have a baby. And they didn't put too much thought into how that happens, and how values and ethics can really impact their life for the long
Right.
term. This conversation today isn't about how to find the right agency. There's no such thing as finding the perfect agency. I will say there is such thing as finding the right agency that's a great partner for you, that is the ideal partner for you. But there is no perfect agency. Every agency model is going to have their pros and cons, and it's up to you as adoptive parents to weigh the value of those pros and cons and see which ones are your top priority and go with the agency that is the best partner for you, where you really feel at home, at
Mhm.
peace with how things work. And as you explore an agency, if there's something that doesn't feel at home or at peace with you, it's good to ask follow up questions, because the last thing you want to do is make an assumption and miss out on a great partnership that truly could have been meant to be. So, this conversation is more about asking the right questions, defining what are those values, and really giving you the opportunity to think about these things before you are emotionally and financially invested with an agency.
Right. Because once you are invested, whether that is, like Kim said, emotionally or financially, it can be really hard to slow down, to step back, or even, give the right attention to things that questions and concerns that you may observe.
And so today we are sharing what we wish every adoptive parent knew, not to make it scary, but to help empower you.
So I think a great place to start really is, what does ethical adoption really mean?
Yeah, that's a phrase that gets used a lot, but it's not always clearly defined. Like, what does that look like? And we really want to help you understand, what does that really look like? And
Right,
there's a big one that, Heather, I know you and I both agree that is kind of a red flag when you're looking for an ethical agency.
right. And that is, it's not defined by speed. Um, by speed, I mean a short wait time, not
Hmm.
defined by convenience. We make it easy to adopt, only do, this, and not defined by guarantees, because, we're dealing with matters of the heart. And certainly there can be guarantees in how someone will do things, but if someone is making you big guarantees that sound too good to be true, they probably are.
Hmm. Right. And that's something that I often explain to families is no ethical agency can promise you a baby in exchange for a fee. So if it's feeling like that, or that is your expectation, that's something to really come to terms with, that no ethical agency will promise a baby or a child as an outcome because you paid a fee. It's really a process. And that's where speed comes into play, where an
Hmm.
ethical agency cannot control the speed of your adoption. They can help guide you through a speedy preparation, right?
Mhm,
The home study can be done in a timely manner. You can go live with your profile online and
mhm,
get your video edited in a timely manner and have timely communication. But
mhm.
the speed and how short your wait time is not something an ethical agency can promise because one, there's just so much that has to align between you and the child you'll be adopting, the characteristics, the preferences you're open to. But also in ethical adoption, birth mothers are given the option of choosing a family.
Mhm.
And so that means a birth mom needs to find the family that she feels is the best fit for her child. And there's no time limit dictating that you will be her best choice for her child and match up with whatever the vision she has for her child's life. So I hope, Heather, does that seem pretty clear as far as like the timing? If an agency is controlling who a birth mom chooses, that's a concern when it comes
Right,
to ethics.
right. And I know that this may kind of feel uncomfortable to actually be talking about, but we have to
Yeah.
remember that adoption always begins in loss. Even though it does lead to something that can be beautiful families created, adoption should not be transactional. If it is sounding transactional in nature, it probably is not under the umbrella of an ethical uh, process. Because yes, there are transactions that happen, but adoption itself is not purchasing a baby.
Exactly. And I think it's just so important that we are saying that out loud. I think that weighs on the hearts and the consciences of adoptive parents. Like,
Hmm.
we don't want to feel like this is transactional.
Right.
We don't want to feel like we're buying a baby. And those can be some really insensitive jokes and comments that get made in
Hmm.
passing to adoptive parents. But I'm really glad, Heather, that we are taking a moment to say that out loud. Like, this is deeper than that. And an ethical agency doesn't gloss over the complexities and the layers of
Right.
nuance that come into play as an adoption goes from A to Z, from you are just inquiring about
Hmm.
information to getting chosen by a birth mom to finalizing your adoption. There are so
Hmm.
many layers that take place, and we definitely want you to know that a really ethical agency will inform you as to these different nuances and help prepare you as to how to navigate
Right.
those.
And I think that's really a good way to kind of summarize this. If an agency only talks about the outcomes, about, your finalization, your placement day, the happy endings, uh, timelines that are pretty strict and guaranteed, but never talks about the impact, never talks about grief, never goes deep into the benefits of open adoption and the feelings and concerns and challenges that birth parents experience and adoptees experience over their life. These are lifelong implications, and really, that's a red flag worth noticing as you are getting to know adoption agencies or any adoption professional you're considering.
I love that you said it that way, Heather, because an ethical agency will not just focus on your experience as adoptive parents, but they will
Definitely.
have a heart for helping you as adoptive parents develop empathy and compassion and understanding of the other people that are involved in your adoption, like Heather said, the birth parents and the child, and the
Hmm.
long-term implications. And one thing that I think, matters so much to us, Heather, is how an agency treats and views birth parents. If you want to know you're choosing an ethical agency, listen carefully to how they speak with you about birth parents.
Right.
What words do they use? What's the tone? Right? Where's the
Right.
heart?
And I love that. Where's the heart? Because an ethical agency will never pressure an expectant mom, won't rush her, definitely won't coerce someone toward adoption. And we hear that now and then from women who had experiences that came from adoption professionals that was not their heart. That was not their value. It was more about the positive result for the adoptive parents than about the care and the compassion and the respect and honoring and loving this expectant mom and maybe the dad too who are making these difficult decisions. So that really is something that it's good to look at. Listen, what do they say on their website? What do they tell you about birth parents? What value are they placing on that part of the adoption triad? Hmm.
And Heather, I don't know what you feel about this. I have an idea what you're going to think, but I hear a lot about, you know, agencies that have very rigid requirements and expectations of birth moms.
Ah,
Um,
yeah.
they want them to prove that she's no longer drinking any alcohol whatsoever now that she's working with the agency and matched with a family, or they want her to prove this and that, and they need her to show up to specific appointments at the doctor's office, at the agency office.
Hmm.
And I know when I'm saying this, it seems like to adoptive parents oftentimes like, well, why wouldn't we want that? That would be very comforting to us. But I think it neglects the barrier that is bringing a woman to consider adoption in the first place,
Hmm.
having to meet some rigid standards and requirements. And Heather, what do you think about that when agencies have rigid expectations and requirements without really establishing a connection and a care with the birth mom, a relationship with the birth mom first? It's like, take it or leave it. These are our requirements.
Right. And that really comes back to that heart. You do have to meet people where they're at. And these are primarily women who are in, what feels to them like a crisis situation. And so you have to meet someone where they are. And that may mean, meeting them via text, may mean meeting them at McDonald's. It may mean just walking at their pace as they make the decision and learn if adoption is right for them.
And I love that you said meet them where they are, and you said it twice. Because think about any moment in your life when someone met you where you were
Hmm.
and the
Hmm.
impact that had versus, the rigid expectations that you
Right,
just weren't there yet to be able to meet.
right.
And it doesn't mean an agency shouldn't encourage a birth mom to make healthy choices or
Hmm.
encourage her to continue great communication. It just means
Hmm.
meeting her where she is. That was perfectly said. And also, an ethical agency when it comes to birth moms will help them explore options for parenting, not just
Definitely.
adoption, not just assume that just because
Hmm.
she's asking about adoption and wants to know more about her options, that immediately is going to be the best option for her.
Right. And they definitely will, eh, you know, respect her and protect her dignity if she chooses to parent. It's not a failure. These are decisions. These are decisions of the heart. They are personal. Every woman has to make her decision and then she has to live with it. So regardless of what she chooses, I always thank people simply for being open to explore the option because it's hard. It takes a lot of courage to reach out and say, you know what, I may be thinking about adoption for my child. That takes so much to admit. So, being respectful and honoring someone just for exploring the option, even if it's not right for them.
Right. Even if the outcome doesn't align with the agency providing an adoption for adoptive
Hmm.
parents, and ethical agencies don't just disappear when a birth mom stops meeting her requirements or
Hmm.
decides to parent. An ethical agency will still care for her and reach out from time to time saying, hey,
Hmm.
we're thinking of you, we're honoring your decision.
Right.
And if things should change, we are still here. There's a balance, right? There's a
Definitely.
line you're walking, and it's easy to walk that line when you truly have a heart for what's in her best interest and you truly respect that she can make good decisions.
Hmm. And as excuse me, as adoptive parents, because getting back to, we're really speaking to prospective adoptive parents here. Those are good questions to ask an agency. What happens if we're matched with an expectant parent who decides to parent?
Mm.
What support is offered regardless of her decision? What support is offered as she's considering decisions? Those are things that it's good to know because if you're adopting, you need to ensure that the women who are considering you to adopt their children are getting the best care they can. And that's really what you're looking for when you're considering agencies is who can not just help us through the process, but who can we trust to help and support and care for moms who are considering us?
I love that. That the measurement of success shouldn't be that the conversation resulted in a placement.
Mhm.
That's not what's required in order to feel motivated and inspired to show care for
Right,
a birth mom.
right. So I think, continuing on, maybe another value to talk about is child-centered decision making. You know, and this is a value agencies have that you may see reflected in the language that they
Mhm.
use.
Yes, ethical agencies make decisions with the child's lifelong well-being in mind, not just on placement day. And I think that goes back to not just sugarcoating things and neglecting the hard parts when you're
Right.
educating adoptive parents, right? That if an adoptive parent comes to me and says, well, I don't really think it's in the best interest of my child that they should know about their adoption story until they're old enough to understand. Okay, we have two options there as, someone that's in that conversation with adoption experience as an adoption professional. We can support them in that and make them feel really good about that and affirm that. Or we can say, well, here's the long-term impact of that and how it's going to impact your child as they develop their own identity as a person and also as an adoptee. Here's how that could cause some fractures in your relationship.
Mhm.
Here's how that could cause challenges with how they trust anyone in any relationship from that moment forward that they remember
Mhm.
discovering that they were adopted.
Mhm.
And so these are conversations an ethical agency will have. An ethical agency will step in at that moment and lovingly say, well, how about this other perspective and think about these long-term consequences with the child's best interest in mind.
Right. Right. And they won't say things like, we help you secure a baby.
Hmm.
And that gets even back to the whole, matching quickly. It's not about the baby is not the commodity. That's just, this needs to be about the child's best interest and the child um keeping everything child centered. And as that also often shows up for adoptive parents is just like what you were saying, Kim, is in that education. Knowing that adoptive parents don't come to adoption, knowing at the beginning what they should know after they've been in it a while, because it is an educational process. Many times couples start the process thinking that, this is how we're going to build our family, we're going to get a baby, we're going to be a happy family. Not knowing that, no, there's things to learn as you're going through. There's things to learn about the importance of openness in adoption, how you're going to maintain contact with a birth mother, how you're going to explain to your child their story. It's not knowledge we're born with. It's knowledge we have to gain along the way. And again, that is typically focused in what is best for the child. And so an ethical adoption professional will provide that education or ensure that you get that for the best interest of the child.
Right. And as prospective adoptive parents with the heart of a mom and dad, your heart is already so full of love for the child that God is going to bring to you. And I will say that in your hearts, you are already moms and dads. You just haven't had that physical moment of that,
Hmm.
plan coming to fruition. But your heart that is designed to become a mom and dad physically on earth is shaped to want to have these hard conversations with your adoption
Mhm.
agency. You want to know those realities and not just have things sugar coated for you and glossed over and be told what you want to hear. And I think it's good that we're having this conversation on Let's Talk Adoption today because a lot of times adoptive parents don't realize that adoption, the process is more a matter of the heart,
Mhm.
and there are so many things that you need to think about that are happening in your adoption now that will impact your child for a lifetime. And I think too that adoption isn't a vending machine. You put
Mhm.
in currency, wait for a moment, and then the result that you desire pops out. It's not transactional. It is deeply a matter of the heart for you, for the birth mom, and for the child who perhaps even hasn't even been born yet. So
Mhm.
I think that is definitely a value to think of when you are considering an adoption agency and how to identify an ethical adoption
Mhm.
professional.
Mhm.
Well,
Because,
let's talk. Yes.
well, I was just going to add, because adoption does not end at placement.
Hmm.
It
Right.
unfolds over a lifetime.
Right. I love that. I love that you reminded us of that.
Yeah.
Um, and as far as the financial aspect of
Mhm.
adoption, finances are often where adoptive parents do feel the most vulnerable. It can actually be one of the main things that keeps adoptive parents from even contacting an agency.
You bet.
Well, it's so expensive, but I know that Heather, we have a heart for helping families figure out how they're going to fund their
Right.
adoption and that it's not just all on their shoulders to figure out
Right.
on their own. And I think that how the funding and the fees and the expenses are formatted in an agency, that's really an indicator of ethics and what their values are. So Heather, maybe you can talk a little bit more about
Sure.
what that would look like.
Sure. And really, an ethical agency will provide clear and written explanation of fees. And some fees may be known, some fees may be unknown. You know, for instance, pregnancy-related expenses, those are not known um, until you have a match. And, different organizations do different things with fees. I think it's very important um, that each case be looked at individually, and also looked at ethically. Because
Mhm.
pregnancy-related expenses are a place that is ripe for, um, you know, uh, feeling like you're being taken advantage of. And for me, pregnancy-related expenses are living expenses. They're defined by law. They are not a workaround. It's not a workaround to get money to a expectant mom in exchange for her baby. Absolutely not. They need to be legal. And for prospective adoptive parents, they need to feel ethical. And
Yeah.
so, in that regard, like I say, ethical agencies will provide their fees. They should clearly say what's known, what's not going to be known. And they also should be honest about the risk and the uncertainty. Um, there should not be financial incentives tied to a faster placement. You should not be able to pay more and move faster. That just isn't the case. Sometimes, like with a home study, if you need a home study urgently, that's paying someone to rush your services. That's different. But it really it should be clear. You should understand. And if you have feelings that I don't understand, I don't know what I'm paying for, ask those questions. It's important to know and to understand.
Hmm. Right. And, just kind of going back to pregnancy related expenses for a moment, Heather, there are a lot of adoption professionals that expect adoptive parents to pay $20,000, $30,000
Hmm.
in expenses, and adoptive parents don't know to question that, and they don't know
Right.
that there are options beyond that. And part of what you and I know is that some of these agencies that are giving birth moms $20,000, $30,000 either directly or partially directly, like wiring funds into her account,
Hmm.
$10,000, 1,000 a month, whatever it may look like. That is in part for retention. They
Hmm.
know they can keep a woman communicating with them and in the adoption plan that she's more likely to keep walking through that if she's getting a lot of money. And that
Hmm.
is a huge, concern when it comes to ethics and adoption. So you really
Mhm.
want to know and really ask an agency what that looks like and how it's all handled.
Mhm.
And also when it comes to just your fees for their services. Well, when are
Definitely.
the fees due? And is there a moment when I'm going to be expected to have a fee suddenly? Um, because the last thing you want is to be unexpectedly rushed.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
that could be because someone's trying to take advantage of you and they know that you're vulnerable. They know that this is an emotional, there it's high stakes, especially for adoptive parents. So you want to know like, well, what happens if I'm not ready to make my first payment to work with this agency? What do they do with me if the timing just isn't right for me right now? So talking with an agency to go a little deeper to find out what their options are and how they respond when you're not ready to write a check. Well, I guess that sounds so old fashioned. When you're not ready to make a payment right away.
Right. Right. Because again, an ethical adoption professional, they'll be comfortable explaining what you can expect, what you will receive. They will be comfortable asking the questions like, well, what happens financially if a birth parent changes mind? What is at risk? What will I lose? Can we continue? Those are questions that are realistic and good to ask. And and you need to feel good about the answer. I mean, definitely ask them. And, you know, if you get the answer, um, and it doesn't feel right, ask somebody else or ask more. For instance, what happens to, our fees with you, adoption agency, if a birth mother changes her mind and they say, well, we did the work, the fees are paid. I'm sorry, it's you lose it all. That's that's not the best answer. There should be a rollover. They should continue with you. Uh, so so you need to um, ask. Don't take answers like, well, that's the industry standard. Let me tell you, agencies do things differently. Adoption professional attorneys do things differently. If you hear the answer, well, that's the industry standard, don't accept that. Ask around because what may be standard to them or what they may think as industry standard may be very different for someone else. So again, it's just good to know. And really, I think this kind of takes us to another great value, which is preparation. Just like you need to be informed and educated and asking questions about the financial process, an agency also should provide good preparation to adoptive parents, to parents who want to grow their families through adoption.
Right. And that preparation should go beyond just filling out a form, logistics, and paperwork.
Right. It should really acknowledge the trauma in adoption, the ups and downs of the adoption experience, not just for the expectant parents, but also for you as adoptive parents. There's opportunities for disappointment. There are opportunities for a lot of excitement. There's, it really is a bittersweet journey throughout. You can be at the hospital with your baby and still feel sadness for a grieving birth parent. So there's a lot of feelings and emotions that come up that you may not have been expecting if you weren't prepared. Just a couple weeks ago, I was speaking with adoptive parents, and they were saying about not feeling peace in a match. And I asked a little more about what that meant. And they had adopted before. And they said, well, the first time was just so easy, and this is a little more challenging, and we just don't feel peace. And it's like, okay, let's analyze this a little bit. Is your lack of peace coming because you're comparing two completely different adoption journeys? Is it because maybe you're more educated now, so you know that this has more of an opportunity for loss than you didn't know or understand the first time around? Or is there something in the adoption case itself that is causing you uncertainty? Because those are things we can if a birth mom isn't communicating except when she wants money, okay, that's something that I can understand might cause a lack of peace. But if it's just, it's not as easy, or it's going to be inconvenient, or even, well, we have a child now, so we have a lot more to think about. It's good to have those opportunities for education and conversation along the way.
And I love that you took that moment to challenge them and not just affirm,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? You lovingly challenged them because your eye was on the big picture,
Right.
the impact, not just to the adoption itself, but to the birth mom and
Hmm.
her feelings, and to the adoptive parents, and knowing as an adoption professional how adoptive parents feel when they pass on an adoption opportunity out of fear, uncertainty, insecurity, that devastates their heart. And that's a big
Hmm.
thing that they now have to get over, right?
Hmm.
So you are loving, and there's so much more to it, but you are lovingly challenging them. And that's, I
Right.
think, with an ethical, that is a great picture of what an ethical adoption agency will do in practical application.
Right. Because that reassurance, oh, I understand, I get it.
Mhm.
That feels good. That feels empathetic. But preparation is what actually is going to protect everyone involved in adoption.
Right. And that means, that there is time adoptive parents need to continue investing
Hmm.
into their adoption preparation as they're waiting for the call and waiting for a placement, having check-ins with your adoption agency, receiving access to ongoing adoption education such
Right.
as webinars and resources that you're constantly being fed and not just waiting complacently
Right.
for someone else to do something, but there you are using this time wisely to bolster your knowledge, to
Hmm.
address fears and insecurities, to understand what adoptions really are looking like in the modern world of adoption, and hearing those conversations and engaging in those conversations through webinars and through check-ins and things like that, that you are making the most of this time, this waiting time. And that's
Hmm.
one way to make the most of the wait time. I
Right.
know we talk a lot about the wait, but
Right. So I
so
think really the final value here to talk about is commitment
mm,
after the placement, because an ethical adoption agency professional, it's different with attorneys. They don't disappear once the paperwork is signed. They really should offer that post-placement support, especially for expectant moms or birth parents, but really for adoptive families as that comes up too, because that can come up. That can come up down the line, whether that is help with the open adoption connection. Maybe that relationship is a little challenging. Maybe expectations were not equally set and understood. Maybe someone's just having a tough time. That support needs to continue beyond the uh, beyond the birth mother placing the child with the parents. It needs to continue.
right, beyond the transaction of it, right?
Yes.
And I
Yes.
love how I've heard you say many times, Heather, wrap around support,
Hmm. Hmm.
that we are wanting you to experience an adoption with an agency that is helping you and birth mom be empowered, educated, informed, and supported before you even enter into a match. That it's not just, okay, you filled out your form, we'll call you when a birth mom is interested. A birth mom is interested, go to this hospital. A social
Hmm.
worker will bring the baby to you, fill out this form, go home, and we have zero expectation that you're ever going to talk to us again.
Right.
And now you're on your own. Now you're parents. Why should you have any
Good luck.
issues? Good luck. Yep, our job is done. Case closed, file closed, archived. That's
And
not wraparound support. That's not
no,
truly ethical.
no, and I do want to say something, and I'm not being disparaging at all, but there are adoptions that happen only through an attorney. And adoption attorneys are awesome, and they are
They
necessary in
are,
adoption,
absolutely.
but they are not providing the wraparound care because that is not what they do.
Hmm.
And I do hear from people who are looking for support because their adoption was simply through an attorney or a law firm, and that wraparound support isn't there. It isn't offered. They don't know where to go. So, if that is your path to adoption, that's great. But I would say for your own well being, for the well being of your child's birth family, find someplace who can help if needed in the future. Ensure that your child's birth parents has counseling not just offered at the moment, but that if they need counseling in the future, that you're there to provide it, and that may simply just mean paying for it, because really that wraparound commitment needs to be a part of every adoption. And if, like I say, if you're adopting through a professional who doesn't provide it, take it on yourself to ensure that you are able to ensure your child's birth parents gets it.
Right. Yes, you can find creative ways to supplement that in your whole adoption plan, that maybe you do work with an agent or an attorney that just
Yeah,
focuses on the paperwork and everything, and maybe you provide your own match yourself and then call the attorney when you're ready.
right.
But it's important to acknowledge that there are other components that really create that full well-rounded adoption
Hmm.
experience for everyone, and that also we want to acknowledge that the adoption experience, the story is not over just because the baby is born and the paperwork is done and finalized, that those are ongoing relationships that evolve over time.
Right.
And it's good to have
Absolutely.
support for that too.
Right. So I think one of the most important things that I want prospective adoptive parents to hear is that, you know, not every family and every adoption agency are meant to work together. There just simply isn't alignment between values. And
Right. Yeah.
and you may have to do some work to find out who is best for you.
Mhm. I think too, Heather, um, families of faith have a much
Hmm.
easier time of identifying what aligns with their values because as a family of faith, you're very clear on what your values are.
Right.
But if you're not a family of faith, it's important to maybe take some time to identify what your values are,
Hmm.
perhaps in part based on this conversation that you're tuning in to today on Let's Talk Adoption. But these are definitely important. Not every agency is the best fit for everyone. I think, sometimes people do call and the husband will say, it could be our first time talking. I don't know who these people are at all. They told me their name and I
Hmm.
asked what state they're in. And then the husband will say, tell me why I should work with your agency. And I will say, well, I don't know that you should.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
know? And so, there needs to be a conversation that is had to where you're identifying, well, why are we particularly a good fit to work with this particular agency? And an agency should be able to answer that for you. What is it about us that, and it's really about their ability to truly meet your needs. Do you really feel like you're on the same page? If they want to have more of a partnership versus a transaction, is that a good fit for you? So
Mhm.
these are some things that it's good to just think about as you discern, because certainly not every agency is the right fit for every family, and that does not mean there's anything wrong with the family, and it doesn't mean that there's anything
Right,
wrong with the agency necessarily.
right. And I think it's really good to take the time you need to ask the questions. And if you're feeling like, gosh, I don't know if I should ask that question, ask it. Ask every question
Mhm.
because, like I said when we started this, sometimes by the time you are asking those questions, it's too late to change direction, or it's simply going to be a bigger change than you thought. Um, I think that it is you know any ethical adoption professional should be prepared to welcome the questions, and also they should, just like Kim said, want to take the time to ensure that they too want to work with you, that it's a good fit on both sides.
Mhm. Yes, and you're allowed to have slow, thoughtful consideration before jumping in to an adoption program with an agency. I
Mhm.
tell adoptive parents, this is your moment to control the timing because once you're in a program, no matter who you're working with, there should be deadlines and
Right.
requirements and things you need to do to become adoption ready for you to expect to have any opportunity of a successful
Mhm.
adoption.
Mhm.
So right now you are in the driver's seat when it comes to timing, but it's pretty much the only time in adoption where you have that control. A big theme in adoption is being flexible and going at the pace that's required of you as
Mhm.
adoptive parents and that's required of you in the adoption, that flexibility.
Right. And I will
Yeah,
say, yes, you are in control of the timing, but you do have to keep in mind until you get started, your adoption hasn't begun. So,
right.
I have also talked to families who say things like, well, we've been looking at adoption for a few years now. Okay, well, looking at doesn't mean you are in the process of, or I will hear from families who say, we've been waiting for a child for 8 years. And I will say, oh goodness, you've been waiting to adopt for 8 years. Well, no, we did infertility for 5 years, and then we talked about foster care for 3 years. It's like, okay, I understand in life you've been ready for a child for 8 years, but your adoption journey starts when you begin. So
Hmm.
if it is something you're exploring, take an active role, take the time to do the exploring, do it intentionally. Put yourself on a time frame if you need to, because the longer you wait to start, that time on the front end is lengthening the time of your adoption journey. So if it is something you're considering, be very intentional about exploring, about taking active steps to get to the point where you're ready to jump in and start an adoption journey, because that's just the reality. It doesn't start until you take that first step.
Exactly. And, choosing an agency, um, it's just important to acknowledge that through the path, there are going to be many moments where you feel like, wow, this is a big ask.
Mhm.
So that is why it is so important that when you're choosing an agency, you choose one that aligns their values align. It's not just wise, it's actually a big measure of protection for
Mhm.
you, the child, and the birth mom. So it's just, I'm glad that you're tuning in and listening to this podcast episode on Let's Talk Adoption because now you are getting this preparation perhaps before you have jumped into something with an agency that didn't align and you didn't know to think of those
Right.
things.
Because I think that's really good, Kim, because ethical adoption, it starts with intentionality. It starts with intentional choices. And if you've already been in a while and you have been feeling like I don't know, it's you still can explore. You still can ask the hard questions of your agency or whatever adoption professional you're working with. You still can ask, but definitely if you are at that starting line, I hope that this has been helpful, and I hope that you've not only learned what you should look at and should ask about, but also maybe it's empowered you to have a little more understanding of what's important and encouraged you to take those steps forward and start learning so that your adoption journey can begin sooner rather than later.
Hmm. And we welcome your comments, your feedback, questions, and suggestions on future episodes. You can write to us through our website at letstalkadoption.com. And thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.